3 days. That was all they gave him. 72 hours to pack up his life, sell his home, and leave the neighborhood he had built with his own 2 hands. David stood frozen on his porch, staring at the crisp white paper pinned to his front door. The letterhead of the Homeowners Association glared back at him like a warning sign. The words felt unreal. You are in violation. You must sell your home within 72 hours or face penalties. This was not just a house for David, it was his sanctuary. He had poured years of savings, sweat, and quiet prayers into turning this modest property into a home filled with warmth and memories. The rose bushes he planted with his late wife bloomed every spring. The worn swing on the front porch still creaked when the evening breeze passed by. It wasn't just wood, brick, and nails, it was his story, but the HOA didn't care about stories. To them, David was nothing more than a problem homeowner. They claimed his garden shed was non-compliant, his driveway too narrow, and his porch aesthetic violation. In truth, David knew what this was really about. The HOA president, Ms. Green, wanted his property for herself. David felt his chest tighten. He wasn't wealthy. He couldn't just pick up and buy another home. And yet, there it was, 3 days, the sun sank behind the row of manicured houses, and the streetlights flickered on. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering about the man marked for removal. But David stood taller, whispering to himself, if they think I'm leaving without a fight, they don't know me yet. The clock had started ticking. The next morning, David walked into the HOA office with the notice clutched in his hand. The room was a sterile rectangle of polished oak tables and framed bylaws. At the center sat Ms. Green, her pearls gleaming under the light, her smile sharp as a blade. Mr. Carter, she said coolly, we've been over this. You signed the rules when you moved in. Your shed violates code. Your lawn is inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Your home has become undesirable. David's voice trembled, but not with fear. With anger. Undesirable? This house is my life. My wife's roses still grow in that yard. And you want me gone in 72 hours because my driveway doesn't match your vision of perfection? The board members shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided his eyes. Others tapped pens nervously. But Ms. Green leaned forward. It's not personal, Mr. Carter. This is business. David let the silence stretch, his eyes locking on hers. Then he said quietly, you've made this personal. And I'm not leaving. That single sentence sent ripples through the room. David walked out, the notice still in his hand, but now his jaw was set with determination. He didn't know how yet, but he would find a way to turn the HOA's rules against them, and for the first time, Ms. Green felt something she had never felt when dealing with homeowners before, uncertainty. That evening, David sat at his kitchen table surrounded by piles of papers, HOA bylaws, neighborhood guidelines, and old meeting notes he had saved from years past. His hands trembled with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with focus. Somewhere in these endless pages, there had to be something the HOA overlooked. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The only sound was the slow tick of the clock and the turning of pages. Then, he froze. A single sentence, buried deep in the association's rental regulations, caught his eye. In the event of a property dispute initiated by the association, the HOA is financially responsible for leasing the contested property until the matter is resolved. David blinked. Could it really be this simple? If he refused to sell and instead leased the house back to the HOA, they would have to pay rent. Not just normal rent, by calculation, triple the market value, due to penalties written into their own bylaws. His heart raced. It was a loophole so perfect, so hidden, that he wondered if Ms. Green even knew it existed. Suddenly, the fear that had weighed him down all day lifted. David smiled for the first time in weeks. The HOA thought they had cornered him. But in their arrogance, they had left the door wide open. The battle was no longer about survival. It was about turning the game on its head. The next morning, David strode back into the HOA office, this time not as a man on the defensive, but as someone holding a secret weapon. The board members glanced at him curiously. Ms. Green smirked, confident that he had come to surrender. I'm not selling my home, David announced firmly, placing a folder on the table. But I am willing to lease it. To you. At triple the current market rate, per your bylaws. The room went silent. Ms. Green's smirk faltered. What nonsense is this? David slid the highlighted clause across the table. Page 47, subsection D. You forced this dispute, which means you're responsible for leasing my property until it's resolved. I've done the math. Triple rent. Effective immediately. The board members leaned forward, scanning the document. Whispers filled the room. Some even chuckled in disbelief. It was all there, written in their own rules they had used for years to bully residents into silence. Ms. Green's face reddened. This wasn't meant to be used this way. David leaned closer. Rules are rules. You taught me that. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. The board, once so confident, looked like chess players realizing they had walked into checkmate. Weeks passed, and every 30 days, like clockwork, the HOA cut David a check for triple rent. At first, they thought he would cave, that the arrangement was temporary. But David didn't cave. He flourished. With the sudden stream of income, he repaired the porch, repainted the siding, and even hired a gardener to keep his wife's roses blooming brighter than ever. Neighbors who once avoided him now came by to congratulate him, whispering about the man who had outsmarted the HOA. But the sweetest part wasn't the money, it was the look on Ms. Green's face every time she had to personally sign his checks. Her once perfect smile now trembled at the corners. Her pearls seemed heavier. The board was trapped by their own system, and everyone knew it. David, once invisible, was now the quiet hero of the neighborhood. Families who had lived in fear of petty fines and threats suddenly found their courage. The HOA had lost its grip, and it was all because one man refused to give up his home. The clock that once counted down to David's eviction now ticked in his favor, every second costing the HOA dearly. It wasn't long before other residents began speaking out. Inspired by David's defiance, they dug into their own notices, their own fines, their own violations. And what they found was shocking: hidden rules, exploitable clauses, and years of unfair practices. Meetings that were once quiet and one-sided now became battlegrounds. Homeowners demanded answers. They waved copies of bylaws in the air. They refused to pay bogus fees. And at the center of it all was David, quietly smiling, no longer just a man fighting for his home, but the symbol of resistance. The board fractured. Some members resigned, unwilling to continue under Ms. Green's iron fist. The few who stayed grew restless, realizing the community was no longer under their control. And one evening, as neighbors gathered around David's porch, someone whispered, "You didn't just save your home. You saved us all." David looked at the roses blooming by the steps and felt a lump in his throat. For the first time since his wife's passing, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, with hope, with laughter, with victory. Months later, David sat at his porch swing, the same one that had carried so many memories, as the mailman handed him another thick envelope. Inside was yet another check from the HOA, triple rent, as always, but this one was different. Attached was a letter. Ms. Green had resigned. The new board wanted to negotiate. They begged him to release them from the endless payments. David chuckled softly. The man they tried to evict had become the man they couldn't afford to lose. His home, once targeted as a violation, had become the most expensive house in the neighborhood, not because of its market value, but because of the HOA's arrogance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, David whispered, "This house was never for sale. And now, it never will be." The neighborhood stood taller, freer, and prouder, all because one man refused to bend, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.